So for the shadowing experience, I went down to the neonatal unit and up to Ward 5. So overall, the patients and the parents were very, very complimentary of the service as a whole. I thought that the staff were friendly and efficient and gave a very high quality of service. I watched a procedure being done to one of the babies on the neonatal unit by a member of staff. The mother was present and she seemed familiar that the test needed to be done and what was going to be done. But the good things about that procedure were that it was done efficiently, it was done in a timely fashion by someone who clearly knew what they were doing and was very expert. The mother was expecting the procedure to be done and seemed very familiar with what was involved, but still described that it was quite difficult to see the baby upset by having it done, and perhaps felt that a slightly more personal approach towards her would have been welcomed. From my own observation, perhaps more greeting, more involvement of the mom, and there was no interaction at all with the mother whilst the procedure was being done. It was done and mother was there, rather than sort of perhaps talking her through what was happening and what was being done next. But the baby cried as a result of having it done, and perhaps some discussion and interaction with the mother explaining what was happening might have settled some of her distress as well. When I was up on the neonatal ward, the transitional care ward, the staff were immediately available. There was one sort of urgent call, and that the staff responded to very, very quickly. And another lady was admitted up to the ward, and she was really made welcome and orientated immediately to the ward, shown what was where what was where. And I particularly liked that the housekeeper went and offered her a cup of tea, and one of her relatives a cup of tea, almost as soon as she was in, and sat down. On the downside, though, I would say they didn't offer to help her onto the bed. They sort of said, "Oh, there's your bed. I'll be back in a minute." And the other comments that were made were that it was really hot, and it was a very, very hot ward. And I think all the parents understand that it needs to be a certain temperature for the small babies up there, but it was described as like a sauna. And somebody else commented that with all the curtains around, it was very gloomy and a little bit claustrophobic, and perhaps suggested that some periods of the day where all the curtains were kept open might help the air to circulate and just generally lift the gloom a little bit. Well, I think a lot of the things that I saw when it comes to reflecting back onto my own practice were really quite generic things. They weren't things specific to any one area, and they're things that could apply equally to all of us. We all do procedures on patients, whether be they adults or babies, and it just focused my mind in understanding that communication whilst you're doing things it can really settle and alleviate any anxiety and distress. And ultimately it all comes back down to good communication and talking and explaining things to people.
Well, I shadowed a couple who were in their first pregnancy, and they had come to antenatal clinic to have their 20-week scan, so they were very excited about seeing their baby on the scan. So when I went in, even though the area was really very busy, I did see that, and it was quite hot. It was quite a hot afternoon, and the staff had put out a trolley of fruit and fruit juice and water in the main waiting area opposite the receptionist. And I could also see that behind the receptionist there was the buzzer system that has been introduced. So I could see that things had been put in to try and make the environment better for the patients while they were waiting. Though I saw all of these things there, they weren't offered, and certainly with the couple that I was shadowing, because there wasn't any space to sit in the main area, we had to go round the corner and sit nearer where the gynae patients would be waiting. And from there you couldn't see the trolley with the drinks and you couldn't see the fruit. And when they checked in, I sort of stood behind them a little bit, and I could hear that the receptionist didn't introduce herself, and at no point did I hear that she offered the buzzers. She didn't point out that there was drinks available, and she didn't point out that there was a wait. So while I was waiting for them, actually what they said to me was that they weren't too worried about the wait, but they wanted to know how long it was going to be. They wanted to be kept informed, and at one point actually they did walk around to see if there was a board to help them to find out how long they would have to wait for, and they couldn't find any information anywhere. And so in the end they ended up waiting for about an hour and 20 minutes, but I think they would have appreciated to know that there was a delay of that amount of time, because I think that then psychologically that would have prepared them for the wait. So again, when we went into the scan, the sonographer was very nice, and he took them through all the different pictures of the baby, but again he didn't introduce himself, and he didn't say what he was going to do, and I think there was an assumption that actually they're in a room and he's got the scan machine, that's what they were there for. But I think it would have been nice for him to have said who he was and actually what his role in their journey that day would have been. I have to say I was really surprised that the two healthcare professionals they met didn't introduce themselves. That really shocked me, because I honestly believed that was a basic that we had actually got on top of. And for my own practice, I think what it's made me realise is that by the time they come to see us in clinic and they end up seeing a doctor, they might have had all of these experiences along the way, and sometimes no wonder they're a little bit frustrated and a bit anxious and a bit stressed. And sometimes I find by the time they've got to the clinic room, there might be things that we need to talk to them about, which requires some time. But I sometimes get the impression that they just want to be in and out, and that's probably because they've been waiting so long and they've got somewhere else to go, and they're just a bit frustrated, or they're a bit hungry actually, or they need a drink because they weren't able to, they weren't directed to those kinds of things. So I suppose for me it's about appreciating that and asking them, how long have you been waiting, and actually apologising for the wait.
I shadowed a couple on their journey through the infertility clinic to see Mrs. Rajkoa, to get the follow-up of their investigations and a plan for treatment. Lots of things that were really, really good. Once they got to clinic, there were some minor delays in getting there, but once they got to clinic, their waiting time was minimal, so they didn't have to sit waiting to be called in to see the consultant for very long. Once they got in, the consultation was excellent. The consultant spoke to them in language that they could understand, was very thorough, went through all the investigations that they'd had to date, explained them all, explained what that meant in terms of a reason for their infertility, and went through the different treatment options with them, including the offer of being waiting listed for IVF, which is what the couple wanted. So with the consultation, they got what they had hoped they would get at the end of it. They were very pleased, obviously, because they got the outcome that they'd hoped for, but they also commented that had been the best consultation that they'd had so far at the hospital. They'd had, I think it was 3 visits to date, so their initial visit, other contacts with the investigations, and then this visit, and they felt that the way that they were talked to, the way things were explained to them, was better than they'd experienced before, so they were very happy with it at the end. The first thing, the couple were late in getting in because of parking problems, and by the time they arrived they were clearly stressed because they were late. They weren't the sort of couple that thought, well, it doesn't matter, I'm late. They were very anxious because they were late for their appointment, and when they arrived were harassed because they couldn't find parking and had to leave the car illegally parked to get in. So were stressing if they'd get a parking ticket when they got out as well. When they got to the clinic, again, they were anxious because they were late. The receptionist was sitting at the desk. There were no patients with the receptionist. She was clear. And they went up to check in and were told to check in at the self-check-in counter. There was only one. People were using it. They were struggling to use it. And again, they had to wait until that was clear before the clinic realised that they were present. And they were clearly, you know, that was adding to their anxiety. But once they actually got checked in, they could sit down and think, okay, now they know that we're here. And it got called through almost straight away after that. Two things. One, if the receptionist isn't busy dealing with somebody at the time, I'm sure it wouldn't take very long for the receptionist to quickly check them in. But to have more check-in points, if there's only one in the clinic, then having more than one would avoid people queuing to use it. Mm-hmm. Another comment that they had was when they came out from the consultation, they had to go for a blood test and had to go and pay for that first at the cashier's office and then go up to Ward 2 to get the blood taken. They had a lot to take on board because they'd been given a lot of information. They were very excited because this was the start of their treatment on their journey to having a baby, and they couldn't remember where they were to go when they came out. And although it had been explained very clearly to them, because I was there, it was explained to them, it wasn't written down anywhere, and when they came out they just couldn't remember where to go. Now I was able to tell them where to go because I was with them, but had I not been there they would have been left thinking, I've got no idea where I go now, because they hadn't remembered. And what they said was, if they'd just written it on the blood form, you know, go to the first floor to Ward 2, mm-hmm. they would have been able to follow the directions. Mm-hmm. So that's something to... Yeah, I think people don't take everything, and we know couples, women don't take everything in during a consultation. It's a lot to process, and just that acknowledgement that actually you may have given very clear verbal instructions as to what to do, they might not retain that, mm-hmm. and that would be very reasonable. That is not unusual, mm-hmm. and anything we can do to simplify it for them, even just by writing on the blood form Ward 2 first floor, would help, I think. Mm-hmm. Yes, seeing the patient journey makes you understand and empathise with some of the stresses that are there. I fully get the car parking issues, and they were clear they'd left in plenty time to get here because they knew there might be a problem, but despite that it was still an issue. The impact that has on people coming in, that they're already stressed and anxious about coming to a hospital, and that's exacerbated by simple things like parking. I think sitting in and watching another colleague at work was extremely interesting from my perspective, because although we communicate and socialise, we don't actually see each other working. And for me, actually, it was a pleasure to watch a colleague at work and do their job so well. The communication was excellent, the empathy was excellent, and that's always nice to see in colleagues, because we don't see how each other works. So I took a lot from that on a more personal level, seeing one of my colleagues at work. And also, you know, the happiness for the couple when they came out of it, because their journey was moving on to the next stage, and that was, you know, the next step towards having a family.